Swinburne University of Technology.
This lunch break for all of us falls at a very nice time because I am looking at badge pathways and I'm thinking about badge creativity and learning design for the next 2 days as I finish 2 book chapters by Sunday night. And so I think, you know, today's a kind of a pivotal day for me in my thinking. So it's actually where I'm going to kind of position myself with you and to think about how badges, when there is a deep dive into badge and into badges, what they actually mean and what they signify and the kind of currency and value that they have for us in higher ed. So this is Brian Mather's. If you haven't seen Brian Mather's, what RSA, the Royal Society, did for us with animations in thinking about existing knowledge and turning it into animations for us, Brian Mather's does in terms of visual infographics on things that are happening in our current world. And I'm going to steal a whole heap of Brian's images. This is Dr. Bernard Bull from Wisconsin. If you don't know Bernard's work and are interested in badges, that's the other thing to have a look at. He writes a blog called E-Tail, looking very specifically at competency-based badges in education. He's a professor of education. And what badges in competency-based education look like. And for me, this is where we kind of are. Open badges are the alternative energy of the credentials world. And where we're positioned, I guess, right now at this particular moment in time to start thinking about badges as something other than motivator and something other than incentivizer to move people through systems, which is where we've kind of seen them. Analytic driven by participating in certain forms of assessment and learning and being marked with badges for doing particular things. So I wear a Fitbit. Anyone who does that gets badges for doing all kinds of things. If you enroll in most online courses, you get badges for just turning up. And those badges are to keep you coming back. They're not kind of there to deter you. They're there to let you chase the next one. And for some of us, that works really well, and for others, it doesn't. But there's been a shift in our thinking around what badges look like to the outside world and how might we think about badges as credentials. So on your table, you have the Open Badges Toolkit. And you also have Bob McKim's creativity test. It's a 3-minute creativity test where you have 30 circles. I'm going to do that a little bit later on, but that's why you have these papers on your table. Bob McKim developed this creativity test some decades ago for people to start to churn out images in terms of their thinking. And I use them in relation to a badge icon and how when we start to develop ecosystems and start to think about credentials in the outside world, that might work. So this is the Badge Alliance explanation of a badge and why badges. So a badge is a special or distinctive mark, token or device worn as a sign of allegiance, membership, authority, achievement, etc. Now, if we take that knowledge of a badge and think about how that might relate to us in our particular space in a university, either as an educator, academic developer, technologist, librarian, careers advisor, whatever it is in our role, and start to think about what the badges might be in that space, then we can start to think about how the stakeholders are involved and think about the outward-facing image of this badge. So it's this symbol or indicator of an accomplishment, skill, quality, or interest. But it actually goes a little bit above and beyond that, and it starts to shift away from what somebody might think of it from the outside world into what we actually think about it ourselves. Because if a badge is issued to me, it's up to me whether or not I choose to display it, and it's up to me whether or not I actually choose to accept it. If I'm given a certificate, I take it, and what we even find with students, even with some of our feedback mechanisms, is that they don't take them, and there's an easy way of walking out the door and chucking something away. But a badge is a digital artifact, and that artifact maintains its life sitting in the digital cloud and enables me to come back and forward to it. Use it as evidence in relation to who I am and where I am at particular moments in time, and to wrap it with other digital artifacts in a story, which is why it starts to shift its meaning from just being a symbol of an accomplishment for somebody else and starts to become personal. So the guts of a badge. What's inside it? This is our badge icon on the outside, you know, which can really be anything. And in universities, we're still really stuck in this conversation around the insignia and how we use it. But does it really matter is one of my questions when I start to think about what the internal mechanisms of a badge actually are and what they represent for me. So inside the metadata of a badge is a whole heap of information that gives it trust and makes it some kind of validator from where it's come from. So it has a very specific name on what it signifies to all of its community, to the community that it's currently housed in and to the community that's viewing it. Its description and criteria are the kinds of description and criteria that we write around formal or formative parts of assessment, where we have criteria and standards for things that people have achieved. We have an issuer. And really for the badge, that's one of the most important things, because the trust in the badge, the value in the badge, is not in what it looks like on the outside. It's all of the communities and networks that actually sit underneath it and around it. So if I issue you a badge, me as Kate Coleman, and I will issue some of you badges for being here today, what does it mean to come from me with the networks that I exist in? And then if I then was issued a badge from an institution, so say the badge comes from Swinburne, then it holds another form of currency again. And this is why the issuer and the identity of the issuer is so incredibly important when we click into a badge and we start to read where it's coming from. Because each of us come from our own trusted networks, and those trusted networks are wrapped up in who we are every time we issue some form of digital artifact. The evidence. Now the evidence place, there's two kinds of thinking about evidence. There's evidence in the fact that I received the badge, because this is evidence that someone has warranted what I know, or what I have done, or where I've been, or my membership or something. But it can also contain evidence. So I might curate a portfolio, I might produce a digital artifact, and be issued a badge that sits on top of that evidence. So inside this badge is all this information in the metadata, including what I've actually achieved to get it. And so we play on that concept of evidence in a number of ways. When it was issued, and this is also really important because I may not claim it, but it may have been issued much earlier on. There were some Dartmouth students filmed last year about them claiming badges, and two of them say that they didn't actually need the badge at the time that it was issued to them, but they loved the fact that they could come back and get it when they needed to. And so when it was relevant for them, for their identity and their kind of shift from learner to professional, they could come back and claim that badge when it was necessary. The standards and then the tags are things that help us actually find what's inside the badge. So if we think about digital and open, who knows about digital badges really well? Who owns a digital badge? Anyone in here have a badge? Kalari has badges. Yes, you have badges. Now, if I was going to ask you what the difference was between an open and a digital badge, have you thought about it? So they're all digital badges, which is what's really interesting, but the open bit is the bit that shifts them, and when we can start to think about them as other things. When they're open, they actually sit in an open source space. They sit in an open network, they're interoperable, they're stackable, and they move between systems. Now, digital badges often don't, and this is where they get trapped. So my badges, even for my Fitbit, exist within my Fitbit data, and I can click them and share them, and they can head out to Twitter or Facebook, but I can't put them anywhere else. If I really wanted to house them in a portfolio to signify more things about me, I wouldn't be able to. I would need them to be open badges. Open badges exist in a system, I guess, for us to be able to demonstrate our story to a whole range of audiences and a whole range of stakeholders in different spaces and different opportunities that we can't do with digital. And so a digital badge is an online representation of a skill you've earned, and open badges take that concept one further and allow you to verify your skills, interests and achievements through credible organisations. So we have trusted organisations and trusted networks, and how those open badges exist within those ecosystems are really important things to think about. Sometimes working in the digital badge space is actually really appropriate for where we're taking our learners. And it might be that we stack digital badges and then we earn open badges. And it could be a way that we think about our ecosystem in learning. So that I have to have a certain number of digital badges that signify that I am able to achieve a particular level, and then I might have an open badge because that open badge can sit to the outside world and tell other people about what I know how to do. They're not just for me. So I think about them as inward and outward facing, and it depends on how you think about a badge itself and what it actually means to you. Some badges you really want just to be able to collect inwardly. They're going to help you in your pathway, they help guide a journey, or they get used as waypoints in learning journeys. So there's digital badges along the way that I might start to accumulate and collect. But what do the outward-facing ones look like? It's a shift in thinking. And so it's not just about the identity of the earner, it actually becomes about the identity of the people who issued it and the people who might actually read it. And that's actually the really exciting bit when we start to think about who owns learning and who in our institutions owns credentials, what are credentials for, how does the system work in terms of credentials, to start breaking down into the ecosystems and ecologies how they might work. So really easily I can think about badges from institutions, and these are outward facing badges. I've got badges coming from museums and different types of libraries and organisations. And I've got badges coming from some form of, and I'm just used my kind of knowledge centre, as something that exists within your trusted space. So it's either science museums, you know, specific sites of knowledge that we have within our learning spaces. And then how do they end up here in the cloud? And all of this stuff, to me, is this really exciting bit in the middle that I haven't actually been able to, I haven't been able to demonstrate all of this knowledge that I'm collecting and curating along my life before, outside of going and getting formal credentials. And there's a whole heap of stuff that we do all of the time that goes unrecognised. And there's a whole heap of stuff that actually even comes out of that credential. If I think about all of the skills and all of the memberships and all of the knowledge and everything else that's also wrapped in that, that also doesn't have a signifier. So how might we use badges that way has been, I guess, my exciting interest when I've moved out of what portfolios do for learning and what badges start to do differently. I am a complete believer in portfolios. I think that we should all, in some moment of our lives, curate what we own and be able to tell some form of narrative around the kinds of artefacts and things that we have in our knowledge bank. But they're really difficult for other people to read. We can curate the most amazing outward-facing website that demonstrates all of the things that we know how to do. And I was just telling Kalari before, I've been playing back in my LinkedIn the last couple of weeks that I haven't been in for ages to get it right again, because the story it was telling wasn't right anymore. And so I had to go back in and ensure that, you know, what was there I actually wanted to keep. Could I get rid of some things? Could I change the way I was writing? Again, change the audience I was now writing to, because different people were probably looking at it. All of that stuff is what we need to do when we curate. Would there be an easier way to do it with some badges? Is some of the thinking that I've been doing around my portfolios. So that badges as digital artefacts and badges on top of portfolios might change the conversation. Just a little bit. Not too much, but just enough to start to thinking about how I demonstrate and reflect myself to the outside world. So again, Brian, and this is the coolest way to think about the worth of a badge. So we talk about badges as credentials, and they have value because they have currency. They exist in an actual network, and they exist in a trust network, as Sir Gervais calls it. They have value here in the journey of a student from this kind of composite collection of knowledge, marking milestones, and often this is where badges are used on these kind of waypoints in a learning journey. For us, in terms of journeys, it could be our own mapping where we mark badges. So when we think about a constellation of learning, where would the important parts of a badge actually exist? And in an aligned curriculum, it's pretty easy because we've actually marked those out. We can see where the connections are between what someone is doing to achieve a learning outcome, and are they doing it in a formative task or a summative task, and then what are the parts of that? And then what are the pathways? So where can that bit of learning take me along the way? When we map out our curriculums, we try and go from, you know, year 1, AQF 7, right at the beginning of an undergrad, and we're thinking about how you, say, build your communication skills across your next 3 to 4 years. So how might we use badges that way? Is one interesting way to think about this accumulation of skills along the way. Here, in terms of endorsement value, so I said before about issuer. Now, where it comes from, for me, the individual, it then comes from a group of people. So even if I issue you a badge, my networks and the value of me are sitting inside that group. which is all of the badge and portfolio people that I converse with and keep up to date with, because our own network exists because we share everything. So it's all based on this, and then sometimes based on the company that I then am representing or the badge is coming from, or an institution. And so it gains value depending on where it's coming from, but it's not in a hierarchy, because the badges that come from me are just as valuable that come from the badges that come from Swinburne. And it doesn't mean that one is less or greater than the other. It's up to you on the story that you're telling with them. So it might be that in this particular instance, I've had a conversation around badges with this particular person that might be more worthwhile and valuable to you at this particular time than a badge that came from an institution. And then around participation, some people really hate these badges. I love them because to me, they actually tell a story about my commitment to community and what it means. And so badges from conferences, badges for participating in particular kinds of events, to me are really personal ones that actually help tell a story. And they're not really easy to get because I actually have to contribute to community to get it. And if I've had to travel across the world to go to a conference and maybe I only went to part of it, I've still contributed to the community. So the participation is really important and reflects who I am. And maybe we can do other things with them. You know, because badges are built in those ecosystems, what does a number of participation badges mean? And could they be stacked for other things? Could we eventually in a couple of years be able to say, well, I've been to 5 ABLE conferences, I've presented 2 papers at them, and I've also got some EDUCAUSE badges, some NMC badges, and maybe one Ascolite badges, put them all together. And I'm able to curate all of these badges to reflect a commitment to learning and to my networks. And maybe be able to have somebody else issue another badge on top of them, is the kind of thing that I am thinking about open badges and how they move. And then the issue of value, again, like this one, you know, what is the value of an institutional badge? What's the value of a company badge? What's the value of a group badge, so a collaboratory of thinkers, a community badge? So I issue for ABLE. When that badge comes from ABLE, it's been issued by me, but it doesn't say anything about me. It actually is all about the ABLE community. And it says in its standards what the ABLE community represents and that you are getting this badge for your representation and participation in that community. But then what's it really worth is actually up to you. Does it actually mean anything to you when you choose to represent it to the outside world is the bit that I really love about this. This isn't about anyone else. And you see when you walk into some people's offices, some people love their credentials. You know, they have them in beautiful frames, they're hanging up on the wall, and to them it has high value, it has great worth. Our digital badges exist in a whole different space, which is why we have a funny conversation around them, because it's not a credential that you're going to hang up. And oddly, some people do print them. You can actually click and print a digital badge, you know, and you might hang it up somewhere as some kind of form of thing. You can print them 3D if you really want to and end up with a little, you know, artifact itself. But it exists in a whole different world, which is, I think, why we have this funny conversation about their value, because they're not out here with us. They're a part of our digital identity. And not everyone has a digital identity, and not everyone keeps digital artifacts. But when you start to talk to people about where their artifacts are, mostly they're digital, which is what it's a really interesting place to start to think about where we keep things and how we represent ourselves.
So, Kate, you mentioned you can store them like on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yeah, and also.
Well, you don't store them, but you can present them there.
Okay, so in terms of, and where else, like is it like an e-portfolio type of situation?
Yeah.
Yeah, and anywhere else, like where else?
So it depends on where they've been issued from.
Right.
So sometimes they're being issued, so say we take Open Badge Factory or Credly, for instance, they're being issued from a provider. That provider is actually housing them in their version of a little portfolio for you.
Right.
And you choose whether or not you want to show them. So you can turn the badge on or off. Again, it's all about you, where you want to show, who you want to present it to. Credly badges link straight into LinkedIn, so I can actually present them right there and then, and I can click in and read them. You can go to my backpack, or you can go to Open Badge Passport, which is now a space that actually pulls badges from everywhere and drops them all together again in a portfolio space. So if you just take the metaphor of portfolio being a container, the vessel to start putting all these digital spaces, you can really start to put them anywhere. Where they're housed is always where they've been issued from. You then choose to present it in different places, and you can curate your collections in different places. And it's what's really interesting about this credential and its value, because it's up to you. And it's up to you how you tell the story with this credential. So hanging on the wall on its own has very little value. But when it's connected to other things, when it's connected to evidence, when it's connected to other artifacts, when it now sits in LinkedIn because you've made a decision to represent it in a professional portfolio, again, it changes value. So the conversation around value and then the trust in that value is what's really, really interesting. Very different from a credential from a trusted space like a university, because it's already got its reputation. You know, these are new artifacts, and we're having to start to think about credentials in different ways. So the Lumina Foundation in the US is doing a whole heap of work, like AQF, around what competency standards are against different levels, so that people can understand badges as credentials. Because maybe I'm issued one because I'm a VCE student, and I get one for communication. It acts as a form of credential for whoever's going to choose to read it and use it. But if I put it with my first year leadership badge that maybe I get in my degree at uni, and then I might get a communication badge for something else from a different institution, when I put those three together, and possibly when I put it with my formal credential, it now tells a different narrative about who I am and what I know how to do, which we haven't been able to do. But is the VCE one any less a credential? Is some of the discussion that we're still having. And people are a bit uneasy about. Because in our logical way of credentials, we actually do move up through systems. You know, so even AQF have us move up 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We move through these levels, and credentials have different value. But that value exists within our system, I guess. What happens when we go outside and we start to think about people who don't use those systems? You know, what does it mean in a knowledge community like a library? If we just take digital literacy, for instance, is there a hierarchy in digital literacy knowledge? Well, in the knowledge there is, but is a library digital literacy badge worth more than the Melbourne Library digital literacy badge? What do you reckon? Yeah. Again, what's inside it and what the person then chooses to represent it. Yeah. It's interesting though, isn't it? Because even in institutions, we play on that hierarchy, that there's institutions with greater value and worth than other institutions. And so we, you know, from the outside go, well, of course, that's worth more, that credential. But is it really worth any more? You know, so what's inside that? Can we actually differentiate the learning and go, well, what you learnt there is actually less than there? Well, we shouldn't actually be able to do that. In reality, maybe that's not the truth, but we shouldn't be able to do that. We shouldn't say that your degree is less than the other. So badges start to shift that thinking. So what I wanted you to do, you have a JISC Open Badge Toolkit on your table. I want you to think about a badge, who those badge designers might be, who those badge issuers might be, and who the badge earners might be. On the front page, you have a constellation or a pathway. There's a little block. This is old school implement using, I know.
Is there an old school implement?
I have old school implements. Oh, look, there's even a box. So on your constellation map on the front, and it starts with the constellation. It doesn't start with the badge, okay? So we're just going to think of a badge, and it might just be a circle that you draw in the middle. Who is the designer of the badge? So pick something that you personally could badge. Okay, you could badge a community, you could badge your people that you work with, you could badge a particular knowledge, you could badge an expertise. Once you have that idea, think about how the constellation would work. So you have the badge, and then you have other pathways that lead to it. Does it have a badge that follows it? Does it have a badge that might come in before it? Or you can actually think about what the evidence might be for that badge. What does someone actually have to achieve to get the badge that you're thinking about? I have spares so you can draw on it in case you want to keep it. Pardon? Oh, perfect. Yes.
What kind of things would a person need to satisfy to get awarded that?
Any badge, anything that you could issue to somebody. And within that, think about, so who's your designer? Are you the designer, or do you think that the badge is more worthwhile if it's designed by the community that the badge might reside in? Could it be, if this is around employability, and this is when we have to start to think about stakeholders, should our employers and our professional associations and people who work with us actually be involved in the design? And who are the stakeholders when we think about badges? Because they also include the person that you're going to issue this badge to. Who this earner is actually a stakeholder within the design. Because if it's not worthwhile to them, we're going to have a problem with it actually having any value to you when it's issued to you. This is your deep dive. This is actually the hard stuff about badges, because the digital ones are kind of easy. We can work out how to incentivize and motivate and to mark particular points in journeys. We can work out what they are, because they're kind of, we know them superficially. We can dive into them, but we know them superficially. What does it mean, though, for an outward-facing badge is the difference. So what badges are we thinking about? Who wants to share? John?
Yeah,
What badge have you got?
I've got the deep dive badge.
Nice!
So I've got a vested interest in it.
Yes?
So I was thinking that, well, in order to earn, you would basically just need to participate in a session.
Okay.
We're not going to test anything or anything like that, so just participation.
Yeah.
The design, well, I've put down learning transformations because I'm from learning transformation.
Excellent.
And and they would be the issuer as well. And the earner would be academics and support staff. We're starting with Swinburne at the moment, but who knows, down the track that could actually extend beyond Swinburne. I mean, we've got Swinburne online here today, so
excellent.
Yeah, so it could actually be greater than Swinburne community down the track. So I guess that's kind of like where I'm, and this is actually a real thing that we're considering. We had the digital literacy workshop yesterday, and people have started to ask for like certificate of participation.
Fantastic.
So at the moment we have to do like a hard copy, but
okay.
It would be great to have like a badge so that people attend those, and it just shows that you've attended it, but it's not necessarily we're testing your competency or anything like that, because obviously it takes more than one session to do that.
Yeah, but you might get a number of deep dive badges before
yes,
there is maybe a curated badge claim that is about competency. So you've been to 6 of these things. Yeah. What can you now evidence to us that maybe is changed in practice is a way to think about competency. And that's the bit about thinking about how they move.
Yeah, and just one other thing is the reason why I was thinking about that is because learning transformation looks at the professional development of academic staff, and one of the measures is the number of events that our academic staff attend. So that would be also a way to kind of have record of that.
Definitely. You can also think about how they then become interoperable with other things. So could it be that you achieve a number of these deep dive badges and there's a pathway into a grad cert? So that by the time you've maybe been to 6 of them and been asked to do a task to demonstrate competency, that badge could now be worth this. Yeah. Is the bit that we need to think about. Well, one module of it is all you think about. Okay. Yeah, so but I mean, that's the pathway.
For RPL.
Yeah, exactly right. Or prior learning assessment, which is what they call it in the US. And they use it really I think when we think about prior learning assessment, I really love that term better than recognition of prior learning. For some reason, it kind of shifts you into thinking about that you're in charge of your application to it. RPL makes it sound like, it's a kind of system that's going to be applied to you, which is really what it is. It takes the ownership away from you. And badges, when we start to think about that, which is why I do really love participation badges, means that I'm now in charge of collecting and curating the evidence to demonstrate competency at a particular moment in time when I choose to make a badge claim. So it could be that these are badges you collect, and then Learning Transformation has a series of badges that I can also make claim for. And that's then, thinking about this real outward-facing badges. Because these are outward facing, you know. Most of your staff would want to put one in their LinkedIn to demonstrate their commitment to learning at Swinburne. Beautiful. They're cool badges.
Yeah.
You should make them.
Seriously, yeah. It will be, I think it's a good way to kind of like have a record of what you've attended and show that to external audience.
Totally agree. Anyone else want to share a badge?
I based mine on a percussion group I play in, and there's a number of different instruments, and so it was just kind of level of competency on the instrument. And once you got to a certain level, I was thinking that because we do kind of there is the ability to be able to teach others on the different instruments, that there'll be a badge where you get to a certain level that you teach others,
yeah,
that you'll be a good teacher. But yeah, it just seemed to be kind of on the different instruments, just linear, I think, for the two of them. So I'm not sure how combining them could work.
And do you think that there is a need currently in the community to demonstrate?
Well, the one reason we would require it is that if we get any work at anywhere, trying to find people that might be suitable for different instruments, we find that we kind of all favour individual instruments, and so therefore if someone can't make it, then we need someone else to be able to slot in. We don't have that agility at the moment. So.
Yeah. I work in an arts community here in Melbourne where we're designing badges for a huge arts community basically, and thinking about us as in the arts community, the things that we have that are not credentialed, and how many skills as artists and musicians and performers that you have that are unrecognised, and how can you actually recognise those skills to people? And it's through the trusted networks who actually are the people. So when you think about, you know, Brian made those columns, it's those groups that are actually more trusted than possibly a credential from an institution, because you may not actually be able to play anymore. And so many people tell me that they have like language degrees, but I can't really speak it anymore. It means the credential is not actually valid. But if you then got it from another community that you existed in, especially, you know, first language speakers who could issue a badge, you know, that badge actually now has more value and currency in the network that are actually going to read it. Yeah. I love them, they're great. I have to have a look if they're... Well, they can. You can have an expiry date on them. Yes, now our current credentials, some of them have expiry dates, some of them don't. But in the badge you can build an expiry date in. So it could be that you will only be competent for a certain amount of time, you know, like our current first aid and emergency care credentials, only have a certain amount of time and then they're not valid anymore. So yeah, but you do need to build that in when you build the badge, and so that's part of the recognition, I guess, of its currency. How long does this currency last for? You know, so does the currency, do you think the trusted network that it's even being issued from will only have currency for a year? Or will it live longer than that?
I have a lot of faded badges. I was thinking for, like we have project students, I teach IT.
Yeah.
IT. So we have, you know, industry projects where a bunch of students come together, you know, sometimes we do a skills audit or whatever, but this might be a good way to, you know, if they've got these micro-credentials or whatever, then that'd be a good way to, you know, resolve what positions are going to be allocated to team members and the like.
Definitely. Scott Beattie from Central Queensland last year was trying to work out a way, and I don't know whether he's implemented it yet, but that badges would be collected throughout learning, and then when you had to do team-based activities, that your team would have to have certain badges represented in it. And so the team, you know, issue that we've got that's really difficult to do, apart from doing all kinds of tests and things with students or using analytics, was to use, you know, say, this group must have this badge, this badge, this badge, and this badge. And so all those skills now come together, and that's how you frame the way that the next group goes on, which I think is a really great idea. And I don't know whether he's done it, he teaches law, and he was going to try and work out how you had specific leadership badges and communication badges and different ways of pulling teams together. And engineers and IT often work in those, you know, multidisciplinary teams. And so if you did pull the badges together that way, it would be a kind of quick way of getting a team functioning and going. Yep.
I see one of the challenges of badges being analogous to currency. How do you ensure the value of a currency stays well, doesn't come over inflated, or
Yes.
I guess a Bitcoin is a sort of a valid sort of comparison point, but
Yeah.
with less safeguards. Can anyone print a badge? And if so, then what's protecting its value?
So you can't print a badge because the badge metadata is wrapped up in the PNG image, and so it's actually if you just dragged it off the net and dumped it somewhere, you couldn't click into it. Its assurance is in that. That means though that people do, and I had somebody tell me recently, well, who wants to click into a badge? Well, we shouldn't take our other credentials as face value either. So we should click into all of them, whether it's digital or some other form of clicking into to actually verify it. But it's the clicking into that actually changes the way that we actually start to perceive a badge, and how many clicks we get into. So if I've got a collection of 4 badges, and each one of them represent different communities and networks, that first click in, the trust is in that network. And so when we talk about the trust in badges, that's really where the trust lies. So currently the university's built up its trust. It's in the insignia and it's in the brand that the trust is there. The badges are in a different place because they're actually beginning a new currency with new trusted networks. Some of them networks that have already existed for a long time, like musicians and artist guilds and other. The guilds in the UK is a really interesting one, where guilds are actually issuing badges, and guilds have existed for a very long time. So it's how the networks work within that space, which I think is a really interesting thing for us to think about. We've already got the networks. Each of the networks exist. We have personal learning networks, we have networks within our disciplines. There's a whole range of networks that we all coexist in. How might we start to tell the story with that? So it's the assurance in that metadata that I can't just steal and I can't just recreate anywhere.
Okay. So how secure are they? Like, why can't they be hacked?
Well, I don't know that exactly because I'm not, technically proficient in the hacking of a badge. But as far as I know, they can't be. And there's more work going into authentication and things that are happening in the new builds of the badge data to ensure that they can't be. There's Bitcoin work currently happening with badges as well. So there's a whole range of different ways that people are starting to think about, this authentication of badges, and that they can't be copied and turned into other things and, stolen as credentials and turned into other forms of information. That will come in time, I think. Maybe if somebody does try and build a badge. I mean, there's a lot of work to actually build a credential for yourself. People have already done that anyway. We had a vice chancellor somewhere at a university who faked a whole, faked their whole list of credentials somewhere in their life and said they had PhDs that they didn't have. So we've kind of always had people, but I guess the trust in the credential is that it hasn't always been clicked into. There's been an assumption that it's trusted. How does it change when we start to talk digitally as part of our discussion around what badges mean to us personally, I guess? It's a really interesting space to be in because there's a whole heap of interesting discussions to have around how much value is in credentials, and are we over-credentialed, and what is the value of a credential really? Outside of higher ed, we're in a different space when we're talking about badges in higher education. But when we think about badges outside of that, who are the trusted networks to even credential? And then how might we fake some of those? Or would we want to? Don't know. What do you think? Do you think people would choose to?
Whatever happens currently with traditional credentials in public.
Yeah, yeah, it will.
But
I mean,
with LinkedIn, I'm not sure it's stopping someone from saying that they have a degree from.
Nothing does. That's the thing. It is really interesting. Who verifies it, and those endorsements currently right now are not necessarily real or true anyway, because a lot of the people you don't actually know who are endorsing you for skills that you actually might not have. There's no verification method currently in that. But a badge being issued from someone in particular changes that. Now there's some work being done, and Serge again is leading that work on what it might mean to actually self-issue badges and then have those badges endorsed by the trusted networks. And does that shift the meaning of credential altogether? So that I decide, I self-identify my skills, and my achievements for the badges that I want. I design them, and then I go about getting the trusted networks in those spaces to actually verify me for that knowledge or those achievements or those experiences, which again is another way of this is really just a very different way of thinking about what it is that we credential and how we get credentials and who is responsible for credentials in the first place. And again, back to my really interesting thought that I'm having at the moment about who owns learning, which I think is a really interesting thing to think about. You know, is it owned by institutions and organisations and bodies of knowledge, or is it owned by us and how we go about, I guess, in a personalised learning space, collecting and curating what we know how to do? My deep dive. So, in terms of a badge, this is the bit that's really important for me, the claim. So, and where portfolios exist, and when you think about those badges that you just were designing and thinking about, who makes the claim and how do they make the claim? How much evidence is required, which is how you build your criteria and standards, and what it is that they've, I guess, had to achieve. So what are the standards? Are the standards standardised so that we go to systems that already exist and we look at systems that possibly exist in formal institutions, or does the trusted network and all of the stakeholders design those standards together? And then how do we work out what they're worth? And do we have to work out what they're worth, or should it be up to me as the person who owns them? This, Tom Smith, it's up to him how he curates and designs and presents the credentials. And he might have a whole heap of them and he actually chooses not to show. That to me, if I looked at them, might have been more valuable. But for him, at this particular moment in time, thinking about his audience and context, were not. And I think that's where some of our discrepancy lies in developing badges in institutions, because we think that the badge is really valuable in this space, but is it really valuable outside? Means that the person who's going to make that claim is actually one of the stakeholders in designing a badge. And so even thinking about your learning transformation badges are people who come to deep dive. You know, what are the kinds of standards and criteria that they think that they need inside this badge? And who will they show it to, and when will they show it? And do they just want it because it'll be something that they might want to collect but they won't actually display it to anyone? All of those discussions are actually really important things and a little bit different, I guess, to the way we think about some of our other forms of credentials.
And also consistency across institutions. If you're going to put level and all those sorts of things on a badge, what does that necessarily mean?
Yeah, and does it mean anything? I don't know. You know, there's some of the things we'll have to work out when maybe we have more badges. You know, so that is the research integrity badges that have been done at ANU, which I think are really valuable badges. So as a researcher, I think they're amazing badges. And I think that they are very worthwhile and have great currency, because every time we move, we have to do research integrity training again. So is there a way, because ANU is ANU, that maybe they just hold those badges and they develop, anyone who wants one needs to go to ANU to get that badge? Possibly is a way to think about not everyone having to replicate, so that we do have some standards within them, and not to standardise them, but to think about what the standards might be. And then if we think about digital literacy, who might those stakeholders be? And who might the stakeholders be in designing and then issuing and then thinking about who earns?
MIT had been championing for a long time a skills-based approach to higher education.
Yeah.
That is credentialing learning outcomes for individual subjects and not necessarily whole degrees.
Yeah.
Is that something that ties in with this approach?
Yes, definitely. And that kind of unbundled, modularised way of thinking is where, you know, badges fit very neatly, because I am competent in this particular space. And do I need all the others? Well, possibly, but maybe I don't right now, which is what that, you know, MOOCs provided for us in a conversation space around what kind of knowledge we needed. And when we go into the library, you know, I'm going to pull that book off. Do I need the whole book, or do I just need the chapter? You know, so that can I get the badge for just that little bit? And do I need to do the whole thing? Maybe not in my life right now do I need that whole credential, but maybe I need the micro credential. It's something that I think that, you know, we won't be heading to in institutions of higher ed very quickly, but it's an interesting way for us to think about even modularising what we teach, and thinking that maybe that topic you can be deemed competent, like your skills. I can be deemed competent, and maybe I don't move on to the next one until I've got this badge. Because currently that's not how we work with assessment. You know, if I get 70 on that test, I can still move on to the next one. And that bit of knowledge that I didn't know and I couldn't apply, I'll probably never know, but I'm just going to move on to the next one. And so how might we start to think about badges in competency-based stuff is really interesting. The stuff that Bernard Bull writes from Wisconsin is amazing on competency-based badges, and building whole degrees around competency-based badges, which also means that if I have badges from other places, can I bring them in and be found competent already and not have to do those modules because I've already got the badge that signifies that I'm competent in that area already, which currently RPL actually doesn't do either. You know, it's a very different system that it's working around. So on your page, if you open up your inside, this is your guts of a badge, and we're not going to do all of it, but think about your badge. So we said on the inside, when we looked at the guts image that Kyle Bowen drew, we've got who, in terms of who your earners are, who your issuers are, all of the things that I'm thinking. So in your badge, you've got skills, you've got experience, and you've got knowledge. And you may have levels and standards that you've already thought about in your outside constellation. What now happens to the inside, so that when you go and build that badge, you're starting to think about how the stakeholders work. So you've got why would someone actually want to earn this badge? And this is where your stakeholders are really important to the conversation, like the learning, the deep dive badge. You know, who actually wants to earn it? And do they want it to be harder than just having to turn up? You know, maybe did I actually physically come in the room, or am I going to get it prior to turning up? Some of those conversations people really like to have, you know, so that I could have enrolled but maybe not come. Yeah. So if I just issue the badge off my Excel list, they're all going to get one, which is then going to devalue some of the badge for others. You know, so how do we start to have those discussions? And then the skills, attributes and understandings bit, the bit that actually make up what this badge is for. And to me, when we think about those skills, they're really important discussions to have with everyone at the table, including if they're going to be issued to students, who those employers are, some of the professional bodies, because they're actually going to have to read them and they're going to use them, and we want them to be used so that students actually understand that these are valuable things in our institutions and they have some weight, and they actually transfer into things. It's not just about marking a significance in your life, it's actually about marking a significance in your life that's valuable to other people. So don't have to fill it in, obviously. This is just for you to have a think about in terms of how the badge actually means something. So this is, quickly, and only because I was thinking about digital literacy before, this is Doug Belshaw's 8 digital literacies, his essentials. And so if we were thinking about a digital literacy badge, what might the skills be inside that badge? So could it be that I have to do 8 of these possibly digital badges first before I can show competence for a digital literacy badge? And so when you're thinking about the skills and attributes in the guts of your badge that you're thinking about, what are the pathways to get to that point? So do I have to demonstrate a kind of cognitive ability, critical thinking, and some form of knowledge to be able to communicate digital literacy? And are those 3 things the most important things to be able to get the digital literacies badge? What are the attributes that sit inside what you're thinking about that actually take you on that journey to make that badge incredibly valuable? Now, I could just get a communication digital literacy confidence badge, but it's, to me, not as valuable as the whole digital literacies badge that kind of sits on top of this. So if I think about a portfolio, maybe thinking about the standards of the portfolio are that I need to demonstrate these 8 skills to get that badge. Or do I only need to demonstrate 1 thing to get a badge? And how do I demonstrate it? Do I need to be able to get the communication of digital literacy, be able to make a presentation and stand up and present it to a group of people, someone will assess it, and that's how my badge will be issued? Or do I need to do an online presentation and submit a portfolio to somebody and it'll be assessed? What are the mechanisms, I guess, for issuing the badge that are actually really need to be thought out? Because otherwise we end up with a whole heap of badges that maybe nobody uses. and maybe lots of people use. We just don't know. You know, they sit in their own portfolios and they think that they're incredibly valuable and they don't show them to anyone in the outside world. But in higher ed, we probably really want to use them as something that helps us move through the learning cycles. So, and my question, I guess, is around this kind of iterative learning and cyclic development that we take students through in learning, whether it's in an online space, in a blended space, in a short module. We're moving through this learning where we kind of go from knowledge and skills to apply, and we go back around it. So what does it mean for badges if we start to think about that? Are there moments in learning journeys that we might badge? Do we only badge the end? Or do we start to get students to think about where their badgeable moments are and where they think they can make claims? And what if they wanted to make a claim right at the start and they were actually badged? Well, then what do we do with them? And so it's not just about what does it mean for badges, I guess it's about what does it mean for learning, and in institutions where we might have 1,000 students, is it possible to start to get down into personalised learning, which badges invite us to do. You know, they take us there because badges are actually about you and not about the whole cohort. If I badge the whole cohort of 1,000 engineering students, the badge has less value because the badge is now all just the same. That badge is actually about you with your name on it, issued to you by me, for the skills that you can evidence. So maybe participation is like that, but if it's for something else and it's around this cyclic development of learning, who's in charge of the badge? And who designs the badge, and how is it issued, and how is it stored? Yep.
I have a bit of a separate question just about motivation.
Yeah.
Often formal education is criticised as providing, I guess, extrinsic rewards to a student. That is to say, and particularly, I guess, true for badges, it feels like you're getting a reward which isn't, well, it's externally issued. The challenge of creating an intrinsic sort of motivation amongst students isn't sort of nurtured in that sense by a badge. Is that one of the challenges with badges, or is there an approach that sort of mitigates that?
I think it depends on the badge, and it depends on its purpose and the context that it's being issued in and then will be used in. So there are some badges that are intrinsic, and then there's some badges that are extrinsic motivators. And it depends on where they're being issued and at what particular time, I think, and it really comes down to what the badge is, what it's for, and what its purpose was when you designed it. And they're all very different, and they'll all be different. So even, you know, everyone in here has designed a very different badge and would use it for a different purpose. And then if you were issued one of those badges, would probably use it differently as well. So do we need to have an answer to it? I don't know. Or does it lie with you, because you're the one who actually earns the badge, and you choose how you want to display it or use it, or not be motivated by it. You know, some people are not motivated. I've heard on online learning spaces where many badges are issued that people are actually turned off by them. And I've done many MOOCs where I get a whole heap of badges that I think look quite valuable, but I've actually done nothing for them. And I haven't followed through with any of the learning because I just was turned off by what was issued to me in the first place. Someone else who did the same course absolutely loved all of that and ate up every badge that they were issued along the way. Which is why I get into this personalised learning space.
Corrupting the notion of learning a lot here, confusing the credentials and nothing.
It is, and this is why when do we have badges as badges and when do we have badges as credentials? You know, and so, which is why I like to think of them as inward and outward, you know. So when are badges designed for inward facing, you know, for me as learner, and when are badges outward facing, and can I have a choice as a learner as well? So, because there might be inward facing badges that I actually really want to demonstrate to an outside world that I have those skills, but possibly the university didn't see it that way. You know, so can I as the earner have choice in the way that I demonstrate the badge?
Just occurs to me that I haven't thought about that, but we academics have had badges for ages.
Yes.
And these are publications.
Exactly right.
They're just a form of badge.
Yes, and we're verified and we're warranted in our learning by our communities. It's exactly what we've done. And if you, even within, for musicians, for artists, if we go into all of our networks, that all exists as well. You know, so that we go up for peer review, when we have exhibitions, there's a whole range of things that we do in all of our networks that are, yes, now badgeable, that we haven't had before. And the peer-reviewed journal publication is definitely worn as a badge. You know, most people stick that up online somewhere very quickly and broadcast it.
Well, the university curates that for us. So.
Yes, yeah, they do. But there's some things that we do that we also don't publish. You know, so there's things that we might publish in a journal that maybe we don't put up on a website. We choose not to present it. We're doing the same thing with badges. We're using them as an inward or outward facing motivator, or achievement or recognition. It is really interesting. And so we have badged for a very long time. We just maybe haven't had the artifact or the mechanism to do what Mozilla has now enabled us to do, which has kind of shifted some of that thinking. Yeah. You do. So your 30 seconds, your 3-minute design is for you to go away, use that bit of paper and come up with all your badges on. You know, it's a really nice piece of work to do, to think about the kinds of things that you think that you could badge in your space, and then to work with your other stakeholders to get them some value and think about how you might actually do them. So you've got 30 circles, you know, leave it on your desk, and every now and again, thank you, draw some badges and think about how they might actually function within an ecosystem here, or just an ecosystem that you exist in the outside world, an ecology.
Anyway, thank you very much for presenting. I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions for Kate.
In our deep dive.
Yeah.
I took deep dive as a good metaphor. I took us kind of into the middle, because this is stuff that many of us in badges don't have actual answers for yet. We're dabbling in things and trying to work things out, and everyone has a different solution, which is what is amazing. So every institution that you look at has done it differently. Every after-school program or library or primary school has done it differently, and I think it's what's really exciting at the moment.
Would you say that like US and Australia, US is a little bit more kind of, or a lot more utilising badges than Australia is? And
well, they currently have been in a place to do it financially that we haven't, and so many of our pilot studies have come out of institutions. There's been more opportunities for people outside of higher education to get pilots up because of different grant money that's been available to them. You know, there's support from the MacArthur Foundation, from the Gates Foundation, from Lumina Foundation, very large philanthropic education services that are providing support to people to go out and explore this. And sadly, in this country, we don't have those opportunities.
And which institution in Australia is kind of really like leading the way?
I think that Deakin has just had this massive Office for Learning and Teaching grant to have a look at badges, and will be institutionally badging this year. Yeah. ANU has already issued badges. Wollongong University is already issuing badges. Swinburne has issued badges. Curtin is issuing badges. You've really got, you know, institutions all over the country doing it. And what, again, is really interesting is that everyone is doing it differently. Yeah. There's a different purpose and a different audience and a different context for each one of these badges. So Swinburne badges in the MOOC are very particular. And then how even Swinburne do deep dive badges, and how Swinburne possibly do its learning analytics badges, and then look at Moodle badges, again, will all be really different. And that's what's providing us some really interesting fodder, I guess, for thinking about what personalised learning means, outside of what it means in a large institution. And then how ecosystems work. You know, I think if we think about ecosystems inside all of this, this is actually really interesting stuff to think about, how our disciplines work as an ecosystem, and then what inside the discipline is another ecosystem, and how those ecosystems now start to talk to each other. You know, which we haven't really done before. The open badge community is very open, like all of the open source community. Everything is shared, because otherwise we don't, you know, move and grow on everything that we're developing. So if you come up with something, you share it with the next community, which builds more value into what you're developing, and for a badge, greater currency. So.
Thanks very much, Kate.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming to the session today.
Yeah. Go away and design some badges. And then hopefully you'll get a deep dive badge.
Oh, one of these days, yes.
Design my badges.
This has been a Swinburne production.